this is an activist, and you know what the Sierra Club is. You know they advocate for clean water, clean air, no carbon, no people, all the stuff that the wacko Sierra Club does. But spiking trees, starting fires, the things that we've all seen in the news. So the Whack-A-Mole Sierra Club comes in, and this is who you're going to see. This is the representative for the Arizona chapter of the Sierra Club, there to testify against a precinct voting bill. So we'll run the clip, and I'm going to run it in its entirety, and you judge it for yourself. Here you go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Sandy Byron, the director for Sierra Club's Grand Canyon chapter. Sierra Club is opposed to Senate Bill 2017 and HCR 2002 as eliminating voting centers and on-site early voting locations and returning to the precinct model will force many more voters to go to the polls on election day, creating longer lines and overburdening the already overburdened election workers and ultimately discouraging voters. It will also remove a very popular way of voting. There's no good reason to make voting, in this case early voting, more difficult, especially when most of the voters use it, voters of all political stripes, by the way. There's no good reason to make it more difficult and erect more barriers for people who work long hours, are in school, lack childcare, have disabilities, or other reasons they cannot vote in a designated polling location to vote, and to limit their ability to use voting centers. Returning to the precinct model is taking a big step backwards for our elections, as it would eliminate early in-person voting. For many years, Arizona had much to be proud of regarding election measures, working over the years to open up elections to more people in more places, making them more accessible. And that's actually resulted in increased voter turnout. Bills like this do not advance that proud history, and we encourage you to please vote no. Thank you. Be happy to answer your questions.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Barr. You state that this bill makes it more difficult to vote, but I'm a little bit confused by that. A constant complaint I've gotten from voters in the northwestern part of my district, which is a semi-rural part of my district, is that since the vote center model was implemented, it's become much more difficult for them to get to a polling location, because with the vote center model, there's so many fewer of them, and they tend to be concentrated in hot population areas. So I'm kind of wondering, what's the basis of your statement that it makes it harder to vote rather than easier?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Colliton, obviously there's going to be a handful of people who don't prefer using voting centers or voting early, but overall, because that is the method that most people use, it's going to inconvenience more people and make it more. So if they go to their precinct and they go to the wrong precinct, then their vote isn't going to count. But if they vote early, they can use any one of these available locations, and they don't have to worry about, my voting location was here, but now it's here. I know from personal experience when I started voting in Arizona, which was a long time ago, that I did go to the wrong place, and because we had always voted in one place, that they changed it. And so I think that, I think overall it's pretty clear that because most people are not voting on election day, it is going to inconvenience and discourage more voters.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
Ms. Barr, I want to unpack two things that you said. The first is, you say this is the method most people use, but isn't it true actually the method that most people use is voting by mail?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Colliton, that's correct. I meant generally early voting.
Yeah, so. Mr. Chair, Ms. Barr, now I'll represent to the committee that voting at a vote center is the method that I use because I vote in person on election day. And the reason that I use it is it's the only way I'm allowed to vote in person on election day. I vote in Maricopa County right? And we have a pure vote center model, and I don't have any other option, even though I would far prefer precinct voting because it would be more convenient for me. So given that context, that it is the only option for in-person voting, of what importance is it that it's the option for in-person voting that most people use, since everybody who votes in person has to use it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Colleton, could you repeat your question? Because I didn't follow the last part of it.
No, of
Sorry.
course. Mr. Chair, Ms. Barr, you seem to place importance on the fact that vote center voting is the method used by most people. But since it's the only method of in-person voting that is allowed in, say, Maricopa County, of what importance is it that it's used by most people? I use it, even though I would prefer the method under Representative Jones's bill. So I'm just wondering why you saw it salient to raise that point.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Colleton, I think the best way to answer your question is we think that people should have as many options as possible available to vote early, and that that if in this bill it narrows the options available. And what I've seen from my personal experience and having lived in Arizona for a very long time is that early on it was very difficult. There were long lines and a lot of people were discouraged from voting. So my concern, our concern, and I think a lot of people's concern is shifting away to from having voting centers and on-site early voting, that we will see voter turnout go down and see voters discouraged.
Mr.
And
Chair.
especially those who maybe don't have the same kind of schedule that you have. I mean, there are people who work, very long days that aren't allowed to leave their work. I'm not saying you don't work long days, by the way. I'm just so saying, but you have more flexibility in your schedule maybe than a lot of people do. So,
Mr. Chair, Ms. Barr, I think that's exactly our point, is that if you have precinct voting, it's more convenient for every voter because you have polling locations so much closer to where you live. Let me ask you one final question. Given that this bill would place voting locations so close to where people live, as opposed to having to drive such a far distance for vote centers, why isn't the Sierra Club supporting this bill? Because it would cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. You have people driving far shorter distances, perhaps even walking to the polls, versus having to get into their vehicles and emit those gases in order to get to a vote center.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Colleton, we'll just have to disagree on that because voting centers can be available along light rail routes, options for transit, and make it easier for people who maybe don't have vehicles as well, and so, or, bikeable even. So we just disagree with your assessment.
Members, any further questions? Anybody else signed in?
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, now that you've seen the clip, you see what I'm talking about. So even their own narrative of carbon emissions and longer travel, using your car, she disagrees because it could be near the light rail or some public transit. Nobody's taking the light rail, especially during the summertime when you're in the primary in August in Arizona. It's downtown Phoenix, 130 degrees. Nobody's getting on the light rail with all the bums and all the other wackos in there trying to get some air conditioning. Nobody's biking. Nobody is biking in 130 degree weather. Oh, I'm going to take my bike over to the voting center because I'm clean air, clean water kind of person. That's not happening. We're driving to work. We're driving to where we need to get our supplies, do whatever we got to do, and we're driving home. So in your neighborhood, around your grocery store, around your church, around wherever it is you go, there will be a precinct voting center. So you go to work, you come home, they're open till 7, generally 7 to 7, 8 to 7. Some are open earlier, but 7 p.m. is a deadline and they close down. So if you can't get there to vote in your own neighborhood, you still have vote by mail. You still have many other options in Arizona, which I think is atrocious, and we're working to fix this. But We continue to hear the Democrats saying things like this will disenfranchise voters. You have 27 frickin' days to vote. And then we hear from some of our Democrat colleagues that, well, you know, the Mexican community is a transient population. They rent, they're blue collar workers, they're trying to feed their family. They don't have time to do that. You can't find time in 27 days to get out and make your vote. If it's that important to you, then you should do it. At what point do we demand that the citizen place a little importance on voting and actually take a few minutes out of their day to vote? So we think making that easier would be going back to the precinct model rather than going downtown to a huge voting center and waiting in line for hours and hours only to find out the printers are down, or you find out the electricity is off, or you find out they have a problem with the tabulator and you have to drop your ballot in box 3, and we don't know where box 3 goes. And then all those votes are commingled from that voting center, even though they're supposed to be held by precinct. We know they get commingled. We've seen it on video. The courts have agreed to this. We've had the lawsuits, so we know what happens. So with that, we go back to the precincts and we have smaller number of ballots managed by less people. And now we're back to transporting ballots to the tabulation center. Well, guess what? We've got a ready-made workforce for that. Now, when I was in law enforcement and it was election time, part of your duties that day, you were assigned to pick up the ballots with an elections worker and drive them to the tabulation center. We didn't touch the ballots. I opened the trunk. The guy put them in there. We closed the trunk. I drove him to the center. He took out the 2 big boxes of ballots. They put them on a dolly and away they went. I signed a form saying that no one entered the vehicle other than us 2 at the time, and I went about my shift.